Today we present you this webinar, Future-Proofing Your Customer Data with Email Validations. Before we get started, I would like to introduce one of our guests, Mr. Gavin Sherry. Gavin, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Thomas. Hello, everyone. Pleased to be here.
And also right after that, we have one of my favorite colleagues, Mr. Nick Schaefer. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, and I'm honored to be one of your favorite colleagues, Thomas. Hi, everyone.
Well, gentlemen, great to have both of you on here. Just a quick bio on Mr. Gavin Sherry. He's got over 20 years of experience in strategic marketing and e-commerce solutions. Gavin now serves as Exponia's senior deliverability and strategic consultant, leveraging his expertise in digital marketing planning and implementation, as well as B2B brand management and email marketing. And Mr. Nick Schaefer, he is the manager of deliverability and compliance at Melgan, where he is the go-to for all things deliverability and passionate about teaching large and small businesses alike how to do the right thing when it comes to not only sending email, but also growing a healthy engaged list. If you do have questions for us, we would ask you to reserve them for the end, for the Q&A portion. And from then, we will go ahead and kick off this webinar. As well, you'll learn what email validation is, why it's important to validate customer emails in today's digital world, how it benefits you and your customer, and where else can email validation be applied. Gentlemen, I'll go ahead and pass this off to you.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Thomas. And yeah, one of the things Thomas kind of pointed out there, and I kind of honed in on it, was building and maintaining a healthy list. And I think Gavin will probably touch on this as well. But that's kind of the whole point of this webinar, future proofing your data with email validations. So before we get started, I do kind of want to go over like a high level view of what exactly email validation is. Simply put, you can think of it as, just a way to verify if an address exists. At least that's the way it used to be. I think now we're moving more towards should you send to an email address, not only is it a valid address or not. And the way I kind of like to think about this also is just looking at how email validation has progressed over the years at Melgun. I've been with the company for a while now, and I remember way back when it first started, the email validation product, it was really just used for simple things like checking syntax, checking if MX records existed for domains. We would check ISP specific grammar. Some mailbox providers might allow that plus sign, some might not. So we would check stuff like that as well. Do spell checks. And that's one of the big things, actually. Typos happen, so much. I see it so much in our clients' email lists. So that's something we've always checked, but it's still a very, very important part of that check. But as email validation has kind of expanded, the tool has gotten much more sophisticated. We're actually checking things like whether the address actually exists or not. We're doing those typo checks, but we're also doing like an analysis of the email address. We're checking for things that may cause it to be risky to send to. And since we have that information, we'll return that to you. Part of the responses that you'll get from our APIs, if you use our email validation API, we'll tell you if it's not only a deliverable address, or if it's undeliverable, or if we just don't know, but we'll also assign a risk. Is it a high risk? Is it a medium risk? Is it a low risk? So you'll have a lot of different information to kind of go off of. And that will let you have a better decision on what to do with that address. There's also many different kind of ways to utilize email validation. I like to think about it in three different ways. The last two are kind of similar, but the first one, and my favorite, is using it in your forms. So whenever a user goes to your website and signs up, they provide you an email address. This is often where like people will fat finger the email address and make a typo. So you can incorporate our email validation API into your website form, and we'll do a check at that point. We'll check for, typos. If a typo does show up, a really cool part is you can embed a little piece that will say, "Did you mean?" into your form. So if someone, as they're typing in that email address, say they typed in gmail.com, they spelled gmail.com wrong, we can have a little pop-up show up that says, "Did you mean so-and-so at gmail.com?" And this is really important. When you're building a list, you want to make sure you're capturing the right information. I think some of the things Gavin is going to talk about will really kind of show why this is important as well. The other kind of ways to use our email validation API is bulk validations. There's really two options here. If you use our mailing list feature here at Mailgun, you can upload your mailing list. As you would expect, you can send to it. But one of the other options is once you upload that list, you can do a validation against your mailing list before you send it. But that doesn't mean you have to do it. You have to upload it into the mailing list feature. You can just do a bulk validation, supply a list to us. You don't have to send to it, but we'll do the checking of your list and verifying all those addresses. So those are kind of the three different options. Like I said, I think you can make use of all of them, but one thing that is really valuable in my mind is putting it at the point where you're capturing the email address, putting a barrier between, the customer journey when they provide the email address, making sure you capture the right stuff from the get-go, and then later on, just kind of going back, checking the health of your list, and keeping it up to date. Because the reality is that email addresses don't last forever. People change their email addresses frequently. There's life events that happen. Maybe someone gets married, they change their last name, they're probably going to change their email address. Someone changes a company, they're no longer going to be using that previous email address they use. So there's really benefits of using both the form part of the email validation and then bulk validation. So with that said, I'm going to actually pass this off to Gavin to kind of, he's going to go over some of the things about why it's important and how it benefits some of the customers that he's dealt with and clients that he's dealt with in the past.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So let's do this now. And so the next word on the screen is probably the word I say the most often in my job. I said so often that they're probably going to put it on my gravestone. And you know the thing, when it's important, you repeat it 3 times, and it's reputation. And this is your sender reputation. This is what the ISPs think of you as an email sender, and they are actively measuring you. And your reputation is formed from two quite distinct areas. One is your IP reputation, and the other is your domain reputation. In short, they're the same. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Your IP reputation is predominantly what gets you accepted by the recipient server, but your domain reputation is what gets you dominantly placed in the inbox. And years ago, when I first started out in working in deliverability, things were a lot easier. If you had a bad reputation, if you had a bad IP reputation, you just moved to a brand new IP and it was a fresh start. And the ISPs, so the likes of Microsoft and Gmail, etc., they have cottoned on to that, and that is no longer the case. You are being tracked both by your IP reputation and your domain reputation. What exactly is it that the ISPs, the internet service providers, they have lots of names, the mailbox providers, what is it that they want? Well, I run a course for Exponia clients, and it's really the inside track as to what the ISPs want. And it's called Deliverability 101. But if I had to condense it, there are 3 pillars to deliverability. 1 is list hygiene, 2 is segmentation, and 3 is frequency. Let's start at number 3, because it's probably the quickest one to explain. If you are a very frequent sender, they are much harder on you. And what do I mean by frequent? Well, if 3 to 4 emails generally is a safe place. Once you go beyond 4 emails in the week, then things become a lot tougher. And some of my clients email every day. And if you want to email every day, everything has to be in order. And what else are they looking for? So 2, segmentation. Are you just sending to everybody where you have permission? If you are, deliverability issues are not far behind. Do you need to demonstrate that you have the ability and you actively segment according to a very engaged audience? So some campaigns will go out to a wider audience and some campaigns will go out to a very targeted audience. But if you're hitting the same volume on a very frequent basis, you look a bit like a spammer. But the number one thing that is impacting clients still, the most damaging thing, the one that the ISPs punish most, is list hygiene. And what do we mean by list hygiene? Well, it's how clean is your list? Okay, well, what constitutes a clean list? Well, a clean list will not have any significant level of hard bouncing. The ISPs are wanting to make sure that the email addresses have their MX records. Now, that might be a technical term to some people, but basically what it means, if the recipient's email address is missing its MX record, we don't know where to deliver it, so it's undeliverable. And if you keep sending to that email address, they will start clamping down. And they're also looking for things called spam traps. Now, you may have heard of spam traps. Let's spend a few moments talking about spam traps. They're actually created by the ISPs and the blacklisting organizations, and they're there to identify malicious senders, so the spammers. But more often than not, the legitimate senders are hitting them as well. So they look like a real email address. They sometimes can be very hard to identify. In fact, some of them are impossible to identify within your list. We can tell you how to avoid them, but you may not always be able to identify them. And they're not used for any type of communication. Their only purpose is to identify you as a potential spammer or somebody whose list hygiene is not up to scratch. So let me give you an example. One of the easy ones to explain is a recycled spam trap. So many years ago, I had my own Hotmail email address, so gavinsherry@hotmail.com, and for whatever reason, I stopped using it. Now, there's a very distinct possibility that Microsoft have not closed down that email address. If it's still on your list and you're still emailing it, you've hit a spam trap. There are other types of spam traps. There are pristine bots. There's pristine spam traps, which are spam bots that are scraping the internet and attacking email signup. And the other one that's significant is typo traps. What is a typo trap? Well, that can happen when we enter our email address, either on a website or maybe in store. So I maybe put gavinsherry@yahoo.co.uk. Well, that's incorrect. That's undeliverable. And instead of getting an absolute hard bounce message, we get a bounce message, but it's been relabeled and repositioned within the ISP as a spam trap. And so I've got a test for you. I'd like you to take your list of non-openers in the last 6 months, download the file, and do a very simple find command to identify these email formats, which are very indicative of spam traps, and these are typo traps. I've done this exercise for many, many clients. You'd be surprised. It's actually, the clients are embarrassed to find that they have a large number of .voms, .coms, @hoymail, @homail. It goes on and on. These are some of the most obvious ones for Hotmail and Gmail. There are others for Verizon and Yahoo, etc. If you Google it, you'll find some more examples of what to look for. So what happens if you find that you have a large number of these typo traps? The next step really is we need to validate your list. So let me take you to a client case study. This is a very recent one, and it's a really impactful one, and I really wish the client had been able to allow us permission to name them, but of course, I think they were just embarrassed by what happened next. They are a very, very, very prominent global name. Everybody on the call knows them. And when I was doing my discovery phase with them, their open rates were 7.8%. And this was, to me, this did not make sense. I checked with them how many times are they emailing their list. 3 times. That seems reasonable. So I knew something wasn't right. I've worked with other competitors of theirs in the same vertical, and this is not normal. They should be achieving well above 20%. So I asked them, can I have an export of your non-openers over the last 6 months? And I found the list was littered with typo traps. So we ran the entire list through the email validation tool before we began their warm-up in Exponia. And today, the client is now achieving an average unique open rate of 28%. And because of that better inbox placement, they have managed to grow their active base by 66%. So when I see an open rate that is under par, what that tells me is that the ISPs are moving their emails to the spam folder and not the inbox. And that is the reason that their open rates are low. So today, they're a much, much happier client. Their average unique open rate, 28%, and we've grown their active base by 66%. This is the solution that I'm proposing for our clients within Exponia. We want to validate all sign-up sources. So the truth is that the web sign-up sources are probably the most healthy. If you're collecting sign-ups in store, they are problematic. If you're doing lead generation from Facebook or from third parties, they can be problematic too. So what we do within any client project or account within Exponia, we integrate the Mailgun validation API. Next, we create a program or an automation that is always listening for any subscription event. And that can be a web, in-store, Facebook, lead generation, anything. If it comes in as a new email address, we can interrupt it before it joins the welcome program. On that event, we call Mailgun's API validation, and we pass over the email address. And the data received back is added to the recipient's profile. And the Mailgun provide us two types of assessment of the email address. They offer us the risk, which is very useful. It has high risk, medium risk, low risk. And they also offer us a view whether the email address is deliverable, undeliverable, do not contact, and unknown. Well, the rules for the profile updates are as follows. So deliverable, we know what that means, and the recipient is entered straight away into the welcome program. Undeliverable, well, we know what that means. That is a hard bounce, and so this email is permanently suppressed. What does do not contact mean? Well, do not contact is a very strong recommendation that this has a very high probability of being spam trap. What we got to remember is that Mailgun have over 150,000 clients globally. They send over 15 billion emails a month, and all of that activity leaves them in a prime position to advise us that is most likely a domain that is populating spam traps. And then we're also left with a very small quantity which is classified as unknown. So why would we get data back that is unknown? Well, the truth is that some of the ISPs, some of the mailbox providers don't give us any data back. That's fine, we accept that. And anytime I look at this, the percentage of unknown is less than 5% of the whole list that we validated. So the rules for unknown is that we take unknowns and we enter them into a double opt-in program. And that, for me, that client solution is how we produce a watertight solution to making sure that list hygiene is not impacting our clients going forward. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background and my email address, both my own personal and if you want to contact Exponia. And I think we can open it up to some questions.
One little piece onto what there at the end. The watertight solution, that is, whenever I first heard you talk about that when we were doing some work up to this webinar, it was really cool to me because double opt-in is something that I always like to see. You know, it's the surefire way of making sure customers are acquiring addresses, the correct addresses that are signing up. Problem with that, though, is that whenever you double opt in, you are kind of putting a step in that process that could reduce the conversion. And I know marketers care about that, but just tacking that part on to that small, like say 5% of the list that's validating, it is really kind of cool. So I like what y'all are doing there, Gavin.
Yeah, you're right, Nick. 7 years ago, the only option really to ensure that clients had a clean list was the double opt-in, and it was a very, very hard sell to clients because you're right. There's an element of conversion. So somebody has entered in their email address onto your website. They've hit submit. Ordinarily, that person would be ready for marketing communications, but with double opt-in, we need them to click a link in the email. And I've worked with clients on optimizing the conversion rate of those emails. And truly the best we achieved is around 70 to 75% conversion. So you are missing a percentage. And for some businesses, that's too significant. So this is, for me, is a very complete solution. We're not missing out on who is signing up. We're validating as we go, and we have a methodology for the small percentage that are unknown. Well, let's put them through the double opt-in program.
Yeah, really like that.
All right, question.
Okay.
Let's start with this first one here. If I integrate the Mailgun validation API on our website, will that be visible in any way? Will the customer be aware that their email address is being checked? Gentlemen?
A good question.
Okay. Well,
No, I'll take this one, Gavin. Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's not going to be visible. It's just something that you implement into your form. It's an API that's kind of working behind the scenes. We've had customers use this. They implement it into their form. And the cool thing about our validation API is you can utilize it however you want. We will give you different options. Like I talked about earlier, you can add the option to return a "Did you mean" message to customers that are signing up. So in that regards, yeah, if you're using that feature and someone enters an address that looks like a typo of a common ISP, then yeah, there may be a pop-up, but like the customer won't see anything, and everything happens very quickly. That's another thing that's come up, and something we've worked really hard towards. Customers always want to make sure that the responses are quick. You don't want to slow down the experience the customer is having when they're signing up for your newsletter or creating an account on your website. So that's really important. Really, the customer, the recipient signing up is not going to see anything different.
Great. Let's see here. Next one. If I want to do a bulk validation of my entire opt-in list, what do I need to do to compare it?
okay, I can take that one because I've asked clients to do this on numerous occasions. Nick, you might be able to add to it, but what I ask really is just a very simple CSV file of one column email addresses. Couldn't be more straightforward. I think from memory, the header of that column says email, and then they send that over in a secure way. That is important. This is your customer data, so they send that over in a secure fashion to me. And through Mailgun, I'll run the validation for them, and then I'll also pass back the results in a secure way. But in terms of what you got to do, no more difficult than creating an export of your entire opted-in list as a CSV file, one column, the email addresses.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. From like the Mailgun UI, that's the option you have. Really, you have a CSV with an email address. You upload it. You can upload it to a mailing list if you want to use that feature as well and validate from there. But yeah, just get us a CSV put together, and of course you can use our API as well to do bulk validations.
All right, let's see. Are there any email sign-up sources where you can't validate?
Okay, well, I get asked that when I'm talking to clients about validations, and clients can get their head around the website validation. They then have questions about, but we collect email addresses in store. We've got e-receipts. We are running Facebook competitions, etc. That's okay. As long as we can interrupt new email addresses from entering the welcome program, we can validate. And we have within Exponia, we have an event which is a subscription event, and that's listening out for anything that we tag as anything that we identify as a subscription. So the short answer to that is, to my knowledge so far, there's not a source that we can't validate.
All right, next question. Can you remove all spam traps?
I'm glad someone asked this question, because it's something I hear come up all the time. You know, first and foremost, I would like to say, like, that's not the point of email validation. Like, you shouldn't have to just put in a large list and ask us to remove like all spam traps, because that's not what we want. We want you to build a healthy list. We want you to acquire addresses the right way. That's through signups and some of the other sources that Gavin was speaking of. That said, sure, we send a lot of mail each and every day, even more every month. I forgot the latest numbers, but it's a dramatic amount of volume. So because we send so much, we've learned a lot over the years. So sure, we know some spam traps, but the reality is no one will ever know all the spam traps. That's just not possible. And at that, there's different types of spam traps. Gavin talked a lot about typo traps, the pristine traps, the recycled traps. So there's a lot of different variation there. We take everything that we can. We analyze trends to come up with that risk score that we talked about. If there are patterns that we see that could start to raise that risk for a particular email address, you'll see it whenever you try to validate the email address. Because we're taking a lot of stuff, a lot of information into account with our global delivery data. So while I wish we could say, yeah, sure, we'll remove every single bad address in your list, that's just not reality. Spam traps' sole purpose is to be a trap, to remain hidden. So that's kind of wishful thinking in my point of view.
Yeah, I would add to that, Nick. There's no email platform anywhere on the planet that can 100% identify spam traps. We can give you the recommendation of what might be a spam trap, so the typo traps are easy to identify. And but the pristine, no, they're very, very difficult to identify those. So what do we do instead? Well, we recommend, we guide you how to avoid them. So if you are focused on emailing people who have opened or clicked, that's the most significant step to avoiding spam traps, because a human being has opened and engaged with the email. But another point is that when we talked about the recycled traps, so I give you the example of years ago, I had my own Hotmail one. The question might be, well, how long does it take for the likes of Microsoft or any of the other ISPs to convert an inactive email address into a spam trap? It's actually quite short. It's 180 days, 180 to 270 days. So that's not long.
All right, let's see here. We've got another one. This one's gotten 2 parts. We have lots of spam users trying to register with fake email addresses. We identify those spam users through an internal tool. How does Mailgun handle this case?
Oh, I like this one. Especially after working with clients over the years, we've seen customers come to us with this problem. There's a lot of spam bots out there. There's a lot of bad actors that are going to try to abuse things, and sign-up forms are no different. They get abused heavily. So yeah, we've worked with clients in the past that have given us examples of these attacks that they've seen, and we built stuff off of it. One example that comes to mind is one of the reasons that we return with our email validation. It's called subdomain mailer. This came up because there was a particular client that continually saw these email addresses that were subdomains signing up on their forms. Subdomains aren't very common in email addresses. There are some cases, and we have exception lists that take those into account. But that was built because of a particular use case where sign-up forms were being abused. So there are different things that go into account. That's one of them. But yeah, whenever we come up with that risk score, we're doing an analysis on, high-risk domains, role-based addresses, those aren't good. But things that, if there's patterns that bad actors are taking that we can catch on to, then that will be implemented for use and validation as well.
Nick, you mentioned role-based addresses. So that's the likes of info at, sales at, marketing at, those type of email addresses. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, role-based addresses, while completely valid, they just aren't meant for certain types of messages. There's no reason, support at or abuse at email addresses should be receiving marketing type messages. I work on the compliance side at Mailgun a lot, and I monitor our abuse at mailbox. I see a lot of marketing messages go into there. The only way that's possible is if someone got our email address in a way that they shouldn't have. I can guarantee you we've never signed up for it. So yeah, that stuff happens, but role-based addresses just shouldn't be receiving messages, or certain types of messages, I will say. Some cases it's fine, but in general, it's something to look out for.
And then part 2 for that, for users who have confirmed email addresses as double opt-in, do we need to validate that?
No. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick. If you've already, if you've got
for the last.
If you have already received confirmation of an email address, it doesn't need to be validated. If the recipient has clicked through a double opt-in, that's an individual.
That does bring up a good question, though, which I was gonna mention. Sorry for interrupting you there, Gavin. But yeah, this was related to a question that comes up frequently. So to answer the question itself, no, I agree with what Gavin said. If they've gone through the double opt-in process, then it's fine. But where I was going to go with this is, just because it's verified at one point and it's legitimate and a good address at one point doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. Email lists change frequently. People get new email addresses, like I was talking about. I think I read some things where it's like 20% of your list could become inactive over the course of a year. Maybe that means they're unengaged, or they got new addresses, or something happened with those email addresses. So you should always run validations from time to time. So that kind of leads into a question that comes up a lot. How often should you run validations? That's something that we've heard a lot. So we actually built a feature around this that we just released. I think we did a blog post on it last week, but it's called bulk validation preview. And basically you can upload a list, and we'll do a sampling of that and give you a result on that sample set of data to basically give you an idea of if it's time to revalidate the list. So if it's, certain percentage of it is, undeliverable whenever you run it, then it's time to validate your list. If you're getting a small percentage, maybe you don't need to. The other side here is that it gives you a cost analysis as well. So if you upload the list and you provide the data to us, we'll tell you how much it would be if you wanted to go ahead and proceed, should you think you need to validate.
All right, next one we got here. We noticed that email cleaning providers can't clean disabled Yahoo emails properly. What should be the best approach while talking about it with our clients, as they are paying money for the service and then emails are still bouncing?
Give me 1 second while I read back through that question.
Yeah, it's a long one.
So it's talking about Yahoo email addresses, and some cleaning providers not being able to clean those addresses out properly when they become disabled. So this actually leads into a good point. As an email service provider, talked about it earlier, we send a lot of mail each month. We have a lot of data, global delivery data that we look at constantly. We can take that stuff into account whenever we're making decisions on email addresses. So those are the feedback we're getting are actually from, in this case, Yahoo's mail servers. We're talking to mail servers when we're delivering real messages for our customers. So if we're getting back certain responses, we know that we can keep that data and use it to make better informed decisions if someone wants to validate that address in the future. So that's how we handle it, just by looking at the sheer volume of messages that our customers are sending out.
Sounds good. Let's see here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last call for questions. If you got any more, we're happy to answer them. Let's double check.
Those are some good questions, though. Appreciate y'all asking them.
Last call, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we got one more. All right, why is it called spam trap? Are these not just spam addresses or spam address patterns? What is the difference?
Okay, well, the terminology starts sounding quite familiar. We've got spam complaints, we've got spam traps. So we have to remember that the spam traps have been created by the ISPs, the mailbox providers, with the aim of identifying spammers. So these are traps to identify spammers. Now, the commonality in terminology when we talk about spam complaints, that's where a recipient is telling the ISP, I consider this brand, this domain, spammy. They're either emailing me too much or they're sending me content I don't want. So that's where the individual is telling the ISP, I consider this domain spammy. So there's a little bit of overlap in the terminology between spam trap, spam complaint. Hope that explains it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well.
Let's see here. We actually got one more that came in. All right, I'll read this one out. Is it better to build the email validation solution in-house or opt for, let's say, the Mailgun API call validation? So is it better to build the solution, the email validation solution in-house, or choose Mailgun for the API call?
Yeah, so I mean, that one's pretty easy to me. I would say use the Mailgun email validation, and not just because obviously we want you to use us, but because as an ESP we send a lot of messages, so we have a lot of data to look at. That goes a long way in making sure the data is accurate and you're getting sound advice on whether or not to send to an email address.
I agree. The in-house solution, it would struggle to identify domains that are producing pristine spam traps. So I think, yeah, the Mailgun solution is sophisticated, very sophisticated.
Well, gentlemen, looks like that's all the questions we've got for today. I appreciate y'all's time. And most importantly, if anyone wants to reach out to Exponia, you may reach them at info@exponia.com. I'll throw that here in the chat in just a moment. And if you have any questions for Mailgun, you can reach us at mailgun.com/contact as well. Gavin and Nick, thank you guys so much for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. That was fun.
Glad you guys
okay,
had a
everyone.
good time today.
Thank you.
But everyone, if you may review this webinar online from our video resources as well. But thank you very much for everyone joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Nick.